Hello, dear traveller, wherever you're listening from. Whether it's midnight in Brussels, dawn in Houston, or somewhere in between, welcome. You've found the Sleepy Side B, a resting place for soft, sleepy stories from music's past. From songs you may know, and the story's history nearly erased. Told slowly, gently, the way memory sounds when you're almost asleep. But before we begin, tell us where you're listening from, and if you have a song or story that never left your soul, we would love to hear where you are joining us from. Let's remember together. Let's drift. Before protest, songs had a name. Before microphones echoed from marches, there was one woman standing alone in the spotlight. Velvet dress, dim stage. One note at a time, she shook the soul of a nation. It begins in 1939. Harlem's Cafe Society, the first racially integrated nightclub in NYC, is packed wall to wall. The lights dim lower than usual. The clink of cocktail glasses hushes into silence. On stage, Billie Holiday, already a jazz legend, takes a breath that seems to stretch for years. The band plays only a few solemn chords. Then she sings it. Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, and no one breathes. Strange fruit wasn't jazz. It wasn't soul. It wasn't entertainment. It was an elegy, a haunting, metaphor-laced cry about the lynching of Black Americans, a horror that newspapers sanitized, but Holiday refused to let America forget. But here's what most people don't know. Billie didn't write the song. It was a white Jewish schoolteacher named Abel Meeropol who originally penned the poem under a pseudonym. Shaken to his core after seeing photographs of two lynched men hanging from a tree in Indiana, he wrote it out of rage. Billie gave it breath. And with each breath, she risked everything. No radio station would play it. Record labels passed on it. Columbia Records, Billie's own label, refused to touch it. She had to record it with a small independent label called Commodore, and she sang it only under certain conditions. It had to close the night. Waiters would stop all service. The entire room would fall dark, except for a single spotlight on her face. No applause was allowed, only silence. This wasn't a performance. It was an exorcism. Holiday's powerful performances of Strange Fruit didn't just stir the audience. They made the US government nervous. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI saw her as a threat. But they couldn't arrest her for singing, so they came for her another way. They targeted her drug addiction, shadowed her movements, tapped her phones, and planted a federal agent in her circle. Harry Anslinger, the notorious head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, who had a personal vendetta against black jazz musicians and outspoken women. He had her arrested. Even on her deathbed, handcuffed to a hospital bed in 1959, federal agents guarded her room, accusing her of drug possession. She died with 70 cents in the bank and a police file thicker than most gangsters. Long before Dylan, before Sam Cooke, before Kendrick. Billie's voice rang out against American hypocrisy, with a song so dark, so visceral, it cleared every room it entered. It wasn't about unity, it was about truth, and that truth still echoes. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth. No charts, no trophies. But history knows this wasn't just a song, it was a warning. Decades later, Strange Fruit would be inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. Time magazine called it the best song of the century. Countless artists have tried to cover it. Nina Simone, Andra Day, even Kanye West sampled its power. But no version has ever eclipsed Billie's, because you can't replicate what's born from pain. And while Billie's song faded into silence, the world marched forward, into new wars, new idols, new illusions of progress. Across the ocean, another generation picked up the mic. Not to mourn, but to question. Their voices came wrapped in orchestras and optimism, but behind the cheerful melodies were questions about death, war, and meaning. They didn't burn crosses, but they did light the match. Next up, the Beatles. A song so layered, they had to fake a happy ending just to get it past the censors. Let's unravel the surreal genius of A Day in the Life. I'd love to turn you on. 6 words. Soft, surreal, and soaked in suggestion. But in 1967, those 6 words were dangerous enough to get a Beatles song banned by the BBC. A Day in the Life wasn't just a song. It was an experience, a sound collage that didn't just echo the times. It twisted them. The final track didn't play it safe. It meandered, mourned, and climaxed with a chaotic orchestral crash that left listeners breathless. And that crash. Oh, that final chord. 40 pianos struck together, fading into eternity. It wasn't just an ending, it was a statement. We're not making pop anymore. We're making art. But let's rewind. In 1967, John Lennon picked up a newspaper. The stories jumped off the page. One about a friend of the band, Tara Brown, who died in a car crash. Another about holes being counted in Blackburn, Lancashire. Tragedy and absurdity, all laid out in black and white. And so, A Day in the Life was born, a fusion of 2 worlds. Lennon's dreamlike, disconnected verses, McCartney's upbeat middle section about getting ready for work, a track that blended waking and dreaming, chaos and control, life and death. Critics adored it. The public was mystified. And the BBC? They were nervous. The lyric, "I'd love to turn you on," was too suggestive, too drug-coded, too psychedelic. They pulled it from the airwaves. The ban only amplified the myth. Let's talk about that middle section, the bit that feels like it's from a totally different song. That was Paul's piece, dropped in like a window into the mundane, brushing teeth, catching the bus, smoking on the train. It grounded the song. Or did it? Even that part felt off-kilter, like the routine was melting beneath your feet. Then the orchestra returns, controlled chaos. 40 musicians told to start at the bottom of their instrument's range and slide up to the top. No melody, just motion, rising tension, a sonic panic attack, and then silence. Then, boom. The final chord, an E major stretched past its breaking point. Engineers turned up the studio volume so high you could hear the air conditioning. That was the day in the life. Ordinary headlines, disjointed memories, a fatal crash, a routine morning, a sonic explosion. The Beatles were shedding their skin. They weren't the yeah, yeah, yeah boys anymore. This was art rock. This was surrealism. This was Lennon and McCartney pushing the limits of what a song could be. Even today, A Day in the Life is studied, dissected, revered. Rolling Stone named it the greatest Beatles song of all time. It's been covered, banned, quoted, and obsessed over. It stands as a monument, not just to the Beatles, but to a moment in time when music dared to be more. A song that begins with a newspaper and ends with the void. And just like that, the polished harmonies of British rock fade into static. From violins and alarm clocks to sirens and rage, because on the other side of the Atlantic, over 2 decades later, a different kind of story was played out. One not told through dreamy melodies, but through raw, unfiltered defiance. Our next chapter takes us far from Abbey Road, straight into the streets of Compton, where music wasn't just a reflection of life, it was a weapon. This is the story of the song they tried to silence, and the voices that refused to be shut down. Let's unravel the legacy of F the Police by NWA. No metaphors, no velvet gloves, Just rage, raw and unfiltered, ripped from the streets of Compton and blasted through every radio speaker that dared to play it. It's 1988. The war on drugs is in full swing. Ronald Reagan's America is bathed in patriotism and denial. Meanwhile, in south-central Los Angeles, a different kind of war is playing out. Not overseas, but on sidewalks. And NWA wasn't going to stay quiet about it. The track opens like a courtroom drama, except this time the roles are flipped. The police are on trial. The charges: systemic brutality, racial profiling, abuse of power. F the police, coming straight from the underground. 3 verses, 1 verdict, no apologies. The lyrics weren't metaphorical, they were confessions. Ice Cube, MC Ren, and Eazy-E didn't just rap about the police. They named names. They described the beatdowns. They didn't soften the message. They sharpened it. This wasn't just music. This was evidence. Radio stations refused to play it. MTV wouldn't touch the video. And yet, the song traveled like wildfire. Teenagers dubbed cassette copies. College students passed it around like contraband. The track became an underground national anthem for the unheard, the harassed, and the furious. Then, the FBI got involved. Yes, the actual Federal Bureau of Investigation sent a letter of warning to NWA's record label. It wasn't a ban. It wasn't censorship. But it was a message. We're watching. The letter didn't silence them. It made them legendary. To critics, it was dangerous, irresponsible, vulgar. To many others, it was the first time someone told the truth out loud. The kind of truth they'd only dared whisper behind closed doors or cried out while cuffed against a cop car hood. South Central Los Angeles was already boiling, but NWA made sure the whole country heard the sizzle. What made it hit harder was that it was real. These weren't studio gangsters. These were young black men who'd lived it, who'd watched friends be stopped and frisked, beaten, jailed for existing. Because I'm young and I'm black and my hat's real low, do I look like a mind reader, sir? I don't know. Jay-Z would echo decades later, but it started here. MTV wouldn't play the video. Parents tried to hide the album. The group was dropped from tour venues. Local police threatened violence if they performed the track live. At a show in Detroit, NWA agreed not to play it. They lied. Midway through their set, they launched into F the Police. Chaos erupted. Police stormed the stage. They barely escaped arrest. And suddenly, not playing the song became just as powerful as playing it. Silence became the protest. Rebellion became performance. You can draw a straight line from F the Police to the entire wave of modern protest music. Kendrick Lamar's All Right, Childish Gambino's This Is America, Public Enemy, Rage Against the Machine. Even punk and metal bands have echoed the same frustration. It carved out a space for politically charged art that refused to be softened for white comfort, and it never stopped echoing. To some, it was just a rap song. To others, it was a manifesto. But it forced a question into the mainstream. Who gets to speak? And what happens when they finally do? Now let's travel ahead to 2003 and discover yet another group of artists who pushed the boundaries in another powerful way. This time, the backlash was just as swift as they exercised their own free speech during a time of war, in another country against those in power. The silencing was loud and played out for the whole world to see. It inspired an unforgettable hit years later. From Compton's street corners to the quiet fury of 3 Texas women with guitars, the rebellion takes a different shape. This next song doesn't raise its fists. It stands its ground, not in rage, but in resilience. Where NWA shouted what the world refused to hear, the Dixie Chicks sang what their world demanded they swallow. One sentence, one moment, and suddenly they were exiled. Not ready to make nice isn't just about an apology withheld. It's a quiet war cry against forced forgiveness. And it changed country music forever. It started with 12 words. "We're ashamed the President of the United States is from Texas," said softly, lightly, casually, on stage in London, March 2003. But those words, spoken by Natalie Maines, detonated like a bomb. At the time, the US was on the brink of invading Iraq. Emotions were raw, flags were waving. Support the troops wasn't just a bumper sticker, it was a cultural mandate. And in that powder keg moment, 3 women from Texas dared to dissent. The fallout was instant. Radio stations across the country blacklisted the Dixie Chicks overnight. Country music, once their kingdom, turned its back. Their #1 single, "Travelin' Soldier," a heart-wrenching story about a young soldier who dies in Vietnam, was yanked mid-climb off the charts. Concerts were cancelled. Fans destroyed CDs in public protest. And in one particularly surreal moment, there were literal bulldozers at country stations running over piles of their albums. Death threats poured in. Country music is often a tight-knit conservative circle, and Maines, Maguire, and Robertson didn't just break a rule, they violated a tribal code. They spoke against the tribe's symbolic leader, George W. Bush. "We were basically exiled," Marty Maguire later said. "It felt like we were blacklisted from the American narrative." But here's the twist, they didn't back down. In 2006, the Dixie Chicks dropped "Not Ready to Make Nice." It wasn't a quiet comeback. It was a war cry wrapped in melody. The lyrics? Viciously honest. The video? Stark, dramatic, with scenes depicting mental institutionalization and ink-black censorship painted across their faces and bodies. "I'm not ready to make nice. I'm not ready to back down. I'm still mad as hell." This wasn't about reconciliation. It was reclamation. Despite the blacklisting, they swept the 2007 Grammy Awards. 5 wins, including Album of the Year and Song of the Year. Validation from the industry. A raised middle finger to the mob. But here's what most people don't know. Natalie Maines had family ties to the Bush administration. Her cousin worked for the White House. The rift wasn't just political, it was personal. Sony Records originally pushed for a different comeback song. Something softer. The band refused. "Not ready to make nice" was their line in the sand. Their return marked one of the first major examples of a mainstream band in the US standing firm in the face of cancel culture, before social media even existed. This wasn't just about the Iraq War. It was about the right to dissent, in an America that often only claims to value freedom of speech until someone actually uses it. And the Dixie Chicks? They used it loudly. If you think the price of protest is high in America, try doing it in a dictatorship. Because while the Dixie Chicks lost radio play, Fela Kuti lost his home, his mother, and nearly his life for doing the same thing. Now we travel from Texas to Lagos. The melody of rebellion is universal, and Fela turned it into a full-blown revolution. Let's take this global. Up next, the rhythm that defied a regime. The drums were heavy, the horns hypnotic, and the lyrics scathing. Fela Kuti didn't just perform music, he weaponized it. In 1977, Nigeria's military dictatorship was at its most brutal. Civil liberties were crushed. Dissidents vanished. But there was one voice the regime couldn't silence with fear. Fela's. His Afrobeat masterpiece, Zombie, mocked the blind obedience of Nigerian soldiers. He called them zombies, robotic pawns who followed orders without thinking. The metaphor was clever, but the threat it posed was crystal clear. The regime didn't laugh. 2,000 armed soldiers raided Fela's Calcutta Republic, a commune recording studio and spiritual sanctuary he'd built brick by brick. They beat him nearly to death. His 77-year-old mother, a feminist legend and anti-colonial activist, was thrown from a second-story window. She died soon after. Fela was battered, bruised and exiled to Ghana. But the man didn't break. Instead, he returned with more rage, more rhythm, and more resistance. He brought his mother's coffin to a military barracks and dropped it at the gate. A silent, symbolic scream heard across continents. Fela would go on to release Coffin for Head of State and dozens of other politically charged tracks, cementing his legacy as Africa's most dangerous musician. He was arrested over 200 times. His clubs were destroyed, his life constantly under threat. But he never stopped, not for one beat. Music is the weapon of the future, Fela once said. For him, it wasn't metaphor. It was literal warfare. Melody against military, saxophone against soldiers, funk against fascism. In Nigeria, the government answered music with bloodshed. Now let's travel across the ocean and leap ahead to 1992 in Los Angeles, California. The police were getting away with their own violence until one song turned the entire system on edge. A track that made politicians panic, radio stations rebel, and cops call for a national boycott. Ice-T wasn't just dropping bars. He dropped a bomb. By 1992, Ice-T was already a cultural force. A former gang member turned rap pioneer, he'd lived every line he spit. But what he did next pushed beyond the boundaries of hip-hop, beyond MTV, beyond anything America's power structure was ready for. He formed a heavy metal band. Name? Body Count. The mission? Tell the truth, unfiltered, unedited, and loud enough to rupture eardrums. Their self-titled debut album dropped a musical Molotov cocktail, Cop Killer. In the track, Ice-T wasn't speaking as himself. He made that clear. But as a character, a victim of endless police harassment, pushed to the brink, choosing revenge. The opening lines dripped with rage. I'm a cop killer, better you than me. It was theater. It was protest. It was a political firestorm. Politicians erupted. President George H.W. Bush condemned it. Vice President Dan Quayle called for its removal. Police unions across the country staged boycotts and threatened Time Warner, the parent company. And just like that, music found itself on trial. Again. But this wasn't the 60s. This was the early 1990s. A time when Rodney King's brutal beating by LAPD officers had been captured on video, but the officers were acquitted anyway. LA burned. Neighborhoods fell. Tension wasn't simmering, it was boiling. Ice-T's song didn't create the rage, it gave it a voice. Amid mounting pressure, Time Warner executives cracked. Cop Killer was voluntarily removed from the album, and Ice-T parted ways with the label. He later said, I didn't want my band to get pigeonholed, and I didn't want people to overlook the other songs on the album, so I pulled it. Not because I was scared, but because I was smart. But the message was loud and clear. America didn't want music that mirrored its own hypocrisy. Years later, artists from multiple genres, punk, rap, metal, would cite Cop Killer as a catalyst, proof that music could still scare the establishment. And Ice-T? He didn't fade into silence. He went on to play a detective on Law & Order, SVU. A full-circle twist of irony not even Hollywood could have scripted better. What happens when the truth makes people uncomfortable? They try to ban the song, but the pain behind it? That doesn't go away. If Ice-T's words cracked open the dam, Rage Against the Machine bulldozed through it. Their amps weren't just loud, they were defiant. Their lyrics weren't just poetic, they were revolutionary. And when they stepped onto the stage, even the Secret Service took notice. No list of songs that pushed the boundaries would be complete without a band that turned every concert into a classroom and every song into a riot. The year is 1992, and America is splintered. The LA riots have scorched the streets. Public trust in the system is crumbling, and into this chaos steps a band that doesn't whisper its message, it screams it. Rage Against the Machine. A fusion of hip-hop, punk, funk, and metal. But most of all, message. Lead singer Zach De La Rocha didn't just perform, he preached. And guitarist Tom Morello? He made his instrument sound like it was hacked from the future, armed with static, fire, and fury. Then came the track that ignited a generation. Killing in the Name. Some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. One line. That's all it took to gut the American myth. The song didn't tiptoe. It called out the unholy alliance between power and hate, exposing how white supremacy wasn't just surviving in the shadows, it was wearing a badge. Radio stations banned it. Politicians panicked. Parents clutched pearls. And yet, the underground blasted it on repeat. In 2009, 17 years after its release, Killing in the Name hit #1 on the UK charts during Christmas, of all things. Why? Because fans launched a grassroots rebellion against the manufactured pop machine of the X Factor, and it worked. That wasn't just a chart win, it was a cultural punchline written by rebels. But Rage wasn't just about songs, it was about acts. Burning flags on Saturday Night Live, disrupting political conventions, even facing surveillance by the FBI. Their message was blunt. The system won't change itself. You have to rage. The band's shows weren't concerts, they were revolts. Zach would pace the stage like a panther, eyes locked on the crowd, voice trembling with truth. Your anger is a gift. And people heard him. College students, factory workers, kids who'd never picked up a protest sign, now marching. And then, just like that, Rage disbanded in the 2000s. But their music? It didn't die. It spread. It showed up at Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter protests, anti-war rallies, because the rage never really leaves. It just waits. If rage was a thunderstorm, John Lennon was the stillness after. But don't get it twisted. Imagine wasn't some soft lullaby. It was a revolution disguised as a prayer, a utopian grenade wrapped in piano keys and dropped gently at the feet of the world. Now we travel back to a time when a song dared us to dream of no borders, no religion, no possessions, and made millions sing along. Close your eyes. A soft piano melody trickles in. A voice, gentle, almost whispering, invites you to imagine a world without countries, without religion, without possessions. Sounds peaceful, right? Now imagine that song being called virtually the Communist Manifesto, set to music, because that's exactly how some people saw it. Let's rewind. John Lennon was no stranger to shaking things up. By 1971, the Beatles had broken up, and Lennon was transforming from pop icon to political firestarter. He and Yoko Ono had staged their infamous Bed-ins for Peace, had declared war on war, and were now laser-focused on creating change through art. Imagine was the spearhead. But here's the twist. It was Yoko who planted the seed. The lyrics were directly inspired by her book Grapefruit, a collection of poetic prompts she wrote in the 1960s. John later admitted, "The lyric and the concept came from Yoko, but I was too macho to give her credit at the time." He eventually made it right. In 2017, long after his death, she was officially added as a co-writer. Let's look at the lyrics again. Imagine there's no countries, It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. These lines weren't just dreamy, they were explosive. Lennon was asking people to deconstruct every institution that had defined human life for centuries. National borders, gone. Religious systems, abandoned. Private property, dismantled. That's not a pop song. That's a full-on ideological Molotov cocktail, just delivered with the softest voice in music. And that contrast is part of what made it work. Lennon said, "Now I understand what you have to do. Put your political message across with a little honey." The song was banned in South Africa during apartheid. It was blacklisted by Christian fundamentalist groups in the US. And after 9/11, Clear Channel put it on a list of songs not appropriate for airplay. All that for a song that never once raises its voice. Behind the scenes, Lennon was being watched. In 1971, the FBI opened a file on him. Why? Because he was planning a concert tour to rally young voters against the re-election of President Nixon. He was an immigrant, a foreigner. So Nixon tried to deport him. For 4 years, Lennon battled the US government in court. He won, but just barely. Imagine that, one of the most beloved musicians in the world, fighting for his right to stay in the country because of a song. Imagine has been played at the Olympics, at memorials, at protests. It's been covered by Madonna, Stevie Wonder, Lady Gaga, Elton John. But even today, it sparks debate. Some say it's naive. Some call it dangerous. Some say it's the most perfect song ever written. Paul McCartney called it the one song I wish I'd written. Its message, still polarizing. Its melody, still unforgettable. Its impact, unstoppable. Because John wasn't just dreaming. He was challenging us to dream harder. But what happens when dreaming turns dark? When the public starts pointing fingers not at systems, but at songs. When a tragedy rocks a nation, and the blame lands squarely on music itself. Now we travel to yet another backlash, the scapegoating, and the fear that followed Marilyn Manson after Columbine, a cautionary tale of media panic, and a Gothic icon caught in the crosshairs. In April 1999, a quiet Colorado suburb was about to become infamous. 2 teenage boys walked into Columbine High School with guns, bombs, and vengeance. What followed was a tragedy that rattled America, and the search for why quickly turned into a witch hunt. Violent video games, goth culture, and trench coats were scrutinized. But one name rose to the top of the blame list: Marilyn Manson. Not the shooters, not the access to guns, not the bullying, the alienation, or the cracks in the system, but the man with the mascara and the mic. Manson's music, dark, theatrical, rebellious, became the media's scapegoat. Cable news pundits called him the devil incarnate. Protesters demanded his shows be cancelled. Venues caved. Politicians condemned him in speeches. But here's the kicker. The Columbine shooters didn't even listen to Marilyn Manson. That was a media fabrication. They weren't fans. There was no Manson CD in their rooms. But by the time that truth surfaced, the narrative had already taken hold, and Manson was forced to carry a weight he didn't deserve. Manson wasn't new to controversy. Born Brian Warner, he'd already made headlines for pushing America's moral buttons. Albums like Antichrist Superstar weren't exactly subtle, but they were never meant to incite violence. They were commentary on society's decay. Ironically, the very systems that created monsters like the Columbine shooters were the ones silencing the artists who tried to warn us. And what did Manson do in response? He didn't rage. He didn't lash out. He wrote an essay, Columbine, Whose Fault Is It?, published in Rolling Stone, where he refused to speak to the media circus, saying, When it comes down to who's to blame for the high school murders in Littleton, Colorado, throw a rock and you'll hit someone who's guilty. And then he stepped away. For 2 years. No interviews, no appearances, no retaliation. Just silence. A deafening contrast to the hysteria around him. Manson was scheduled to play in Denver weeks after Columbine. His concert was immediately cancelled, but he still showed up in town, quietly donating to mental health charities, out of the spotlight. He studied journalism before becoming an artist, and ironically, it was the media he once admired that turned him into public enemy #1. Senators used his lyrics as evidence of moral collapse during hearings, often misquoting or completely misunderstanding them. The backlash led to the postponement of Holy Wood, an album that Manson originally designed as a concept project critiquing America's obsession with fame and violence. In a grim twist of fate, it mirrored the exact themes he was being condemned for. After Columbine, Manson's career never fully recovered. Not commercially, anyway. The cancellations continued. Radio stations pulled his music. MTV stopped airing his videos. And while fans remained loyal, the world had labeled him as too dangerous, too dark, too close to the flame. But the art didn't die. It evolved. His later work became more nuanced. Less shock rock, more psychological warfare. He began to critique the very culture that had once praised and punished him in equal measure. Here's the cruel irony. America created Marilyn Manson. Then it vilified him for reflecting back its ugliest truths. He wasn't a villain. He was a mirror. And in the aftermath of Columbine, that mirror became too clear, too uncomfortable, too revealing. When fear grips a nation, it doesn't always point its finger at the real threat. Sometimes it points at the man in eyeliner holding a mic. While America was silencing one of its most controversial artists halfway across the globe, musicians in Iran were risking their lives just to be heard. There, it wasn't about backlash, it was about survival. Because in Iran, rock and metal weren't just frowned upon, they were illegal. Now let's travel to the Middle East, where the forbidden riffs of Tehran, the cassette tape rebellion, and the brave souls of Iran's underground rock scene who played louder, knowing it might cost them everything. In the neon-lit chaos of 1970s, Tehran rock music was more than just a sound. It was rebellion in stereo. A generation of Iranian youth, cassette tapes in their pockets, and dreams of Hendrix in their heads, were tuning in, turning up, and temporarily escaping a tightening grip. But that freedom? It wouldn't last. After the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran changed overnight. Ayatollah Khomeini took power, and with him came a sweeping crackdown on Western culture. Music, once the pulse of the city's nightlife, was suddenly silenced. Guitars were outlawed, record shops were shuttered, album covers were burned in the streets, and yet the beat never died. Before the revolution, Iran had a thriving music scene. Bands like the Black Cats, Kurosh Yagmai, and Gugush electrified crowds, blending Persian melodies with Western rock, funk, and disco. But after '79, these artists either fled or fell silent. For those who stayed, survival meant going underground, literally. Rehearsals moved to basements. Performances happened in secret. Instruments were smuggled in pieces. Recording studios were makeshift soundproofed bedrooms. Distribution was done via bootleg tapes passed hand to hand, often with no labels. Just scribbled notes and whispered recommendations. You didn't just buy music, you risked everything to hear it. To understand the stakes, you have to understand the regime. In Iran, illegal music could land you in prison. Or worse, rock and metal were labeled satanic by the government. Those caught performing without permission faced public lashings, confiscation of gear, or long detainment without trial. And still, they played. A wave of underground bands emerged in the 1990s and early 2000s. Artists like Oh Hum, Angband and Ahura, who wrote songs in Farsi and English, touching on despair, resistance and identity. They coded their lyrics to avoid censorship. They released tracks online under fake names. They played rooftop shows with one eye on the amp and the other on the street below. In a nation where expression could be fatal, rock music became an act of spiritual defiance. Then came the internet. Suddenly, Iranian artists could bypass the state entirely, uploading to MySpace, sharing MP3s on early file-sharing forums, messaging fans around the globe. This gave birth to a new movement, one not just resisting, but connecting. Diaspora musicians helped amplify the underground scene. Radio stations in Europe began showcasing Iranian rock. And in 2009, during the Green Movement protests, music became protest once again. Songs like Ay Iran were remixed with distortion and fury. Protesters chanted lyrics in the streets. Music videos were filmed guerrilla style, with singers masked or silhouetted, symbolizing every Iranian voice stifled by the regime. And still, the regime cracked down. A band called Confess was arrested in 2015 and accused of blasphemy for their metal lyrics. The members faced the death penalty. They eventually fled and were granted asylum in Norway. Ahura, one of the first Iranian metal bands to release an English-language album, had to perform under constant threat. Their first concerts held without permits, sometimes cancelled mid-show by plainclothes officers. Kiosk, a blues rock band, began as an underground act in Tehran, recording their first album secretly in a home studio. They eventually moved to the US, becoming a voice for the Iranian diaspora. To this day, Western-style music in Iran requires a government license, nearly impossible to get for any group, with distorted guitars or lyrics not praising the regime. And yet, there's still a heartbeat. In bedrooms, in basements, behind VPNs and encrypted chat threads. Young Iranians are still picking up guitars, still writing lyrics, still pressing record, even when they know what it might cost them. Because when you silence a generation, they don't stop singing. They just get louder underground. Now flip the record, and let's head to 1977, Britain, where punk wasn't about hiding. It was about screaming, loudly, publicly, chaotically. While Iranian musicians were forced to rebel in silence, a group of sneering Brits strapped safety pins to their faces and took on the monarchy in broad daylight. There was a song so offensive, it was banned in every way possible. Still hit number 2 on the charts. In 1977, England was preparing to celebrate Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee, 25 years on the throne. The mood across the UK, national pride, tea parties and waving Union Jacks. But somewhere far from Buckingham Palace, in the back rooms of a London record label, a group of misfit anarchists had a very different idea for a celebration. The Sex Pistols, fronted by the venomous Johnny Rotten, released God Save the Queen, and it instantly lit the match on the most controversial musical fire of the decade. At first listen, the song sounds like a spit-soaked tantrum, but beneath the raw punk distortion was a masterclass in subversion. God save the Queen, she ain't no human being. This wasn't just rebellion, it was blasphemy. The band accused the monarchy of being a figurehead for a fascist regime and condemned British nationalism as a delusion, sung just as the country planned a royal victory lap. The title wasn't accidental. It hijacked the anthem's name and turned the Queen from a symbol of grace into a target of working-class rage. British media went into full damage control. BBC and ITV banned the song. Major retailers like Woolworths and WHS Smith refused to stock it. Even radio hosts who wanted to play it were threatened with suspension. Yet despite all that, or because of it, it soared to the top of the charts. It hit number 2 on the UK singles chart, but many believed it was actually number 1 and was intentionally blocked to avoid public embarrassment during the Jubilee. This theory gained traction when insiders admitted the chart placements were, shall we say, gently massaged. When the Sex Pistols attempted to perform the song on a boat floating down the Thames, their own punk version of a royal flotilla, the cops stormed the dock. Band manager Malcolm McLaren and others were arrested mid-performance. It wasn't just a show, it was a calculated protest. Johnny Rotten was later attacked in the streets by angry patriots. Concerts were shut down before they even started. And yet, God Save the Queen became a battle cry for the disillusioned youth who saw through the gloss of the empire. What made this story legendary wasn't just the song, it was the system's reaction. It exposed how fragile the illusion of free speech was when aimed at institutions of power. It proved that censorship doesn't kill ideas, it amplifies them, and it kicked open the doors for the punk movement to become more than a fashion trend. It became a political weapon, a cultural statement, and a mirror to the hypocrisy of polite society. As the final chord of God Save the Queen screeches into silence, we jump forward 41 years, but the rebellion remains. Where the Sex Pistols challenged empire and monarchy, Donald Glover, also known as Childish Gambino, faced off with America's most uncomfortable truths: race, gun violence, and distraction. This Is America wasn't banned in the traditional sense. It didn't have to be. Its shocking visuals, layered meanings, and biting critique made it unpalatable to many in power. It didn't get pulled off air. It got buried under reactions, controversies, and think pieces. But its echo still lingers. Let's turn down the distortion, dim the spotlight, and walk into the haunting world of 2018's most unforgettable musical protest. In May 2018, while most of America was scrolling through memes and dancing to top 40 hits, Donald Glover, performing under the name Childish Gambino, dropped a cultural grenade wrapped in a 4-minute music video. It was called This Is America, and no one who watched it walked away untouched. The video opens with Glover dancing, shirtless, grinning, theatrical. It's joyful, familiar. But then he turns, shoots a man in the head. From there, the video becomes a psychological tug-of-war between entertainment and brutality. Scenes of massacre and police violence flash by in the background, while Glover and a chorus of schoolchildren dance front and center. Each frame feels like a gut punch wrapped in a pop song. It's not subtle. It's not safe. And that was the point. This Is America isn't catchy by accident. Its layered production includes cheerful choir samples, stark gunfire, and trap beats that weave in and out like mood swings. But it's what Glover says that truly stings. This is America. Don't catch you slipping up. It's a warning. To Black America, to everyone. You can be dancing one moment and bleeding the next. You can be famous today, forgotten tomorrow. The American dream, he suggests, is selective, and survival requires awareness most don't have the luxury to develop. The video racked up over 12 million views in 24 hours, spawning reaction videos, conspiracy theories, and think pieces across every corner of the internet. And yet, it was never quite embraced. There was no radio play. Award shows tiptoed. Mainstream media didn't know where to file it. It wasn't banned outright, but it wasn't promoted either. It lived in a strange purgatory, viral but uninvited. It made people uncomfortable, and society doesn't reward discomfort. That's its quiet kind of censorship, not with scissors, but silence. Behind the cultural noise, This Is America forced questions. Why are we more outraged by kneeling athletes than mass shootings? Why do we worship celebrity but ignore injustice? Why does America look away when the mirror gets too sharp? It wasn't just about black pain. It was about America's gaze and what it chooses to center. As our final story fades into the quiet hum of night, let's pause. From Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit to Glover's This Is America, we've walked in and out of decades of protest in melody form. Songs that got banned, burned, or buried, not because they were false, but because they were too true. And that's the thread that ties all 12 of these stories together. They each held up a mirror. They each made someone uncomfortable. And in return, they were either silenced, punished, or erased. But here's the truth. Art is not meant to soothe power. It's meant to reveal it. Whether it's a jazz singer in the 1930s, a punk band on the Thames, or a modern rapper with a viral video, these artists were historians, truth-tellers, alarm bells. And we, as a society, don't just need to tolerate them, we need to protect them. We need to study them. We need to honor them. Because when protest songs vanish from the airwaves, so do the warnings. So let's keep singing, keep listening, keep preserving the voices they tried to silence. Because that silence, it was never for our comfort. It was for their control. This is the sleepy side B, where the music stories may fade, but the message stays. If you made it here, thank you. Thank you for traveling through time with us, remembering these moments in music history, remembering what music tried to say when the world may not have been ready to hear it. Which one of these songs, artists and their controversies do you remember, or do you remember them all? The Sleepy Side B is just getting started. If these songs moved you or soothed you, we hope you'll subscribe. More sleepy stories are on the way. Some loud, some forgotten, all worth dreaming through. Until next time, sleep soft, dear traveler.